In granting the team unfettered access, the government acted in the good faith expectation that it would in fact prepare the ground for a visit. Subsequently, the High Commissioner addressed a letter in November 2012 proposing possible areas of technical cooperation between the government of Sri Lanka and her office. She also chose to introduce a new conditionality, stating that meaningful progress needs to be achieved in areas outlined for technical cooperation before visiting Sri Lanka at some time in the first half of 2030. Thus, it now appears that the team's agenda was purely to collect material for her present report and not to help prepare the ground for a visit. The government of Sri Lanka's reply in December 2012 was to emphasize that since the implementation of the National Plan of Action and the National Human Rights Action Plan are continuously evolving national processes which were being monitored in order to arrive at a considered opinion on the progress of human rights related issues, that there is no substitute for experiencing at first hand the ground situation. We reiterate, Mr. President, therefore, that a visit by the High Commissioner would be an ideal opportunity to view the developments objectively and holistically, imperative for the discharge of a mandate. Mr. President, we also note that an inordinate amount of attention is paid to Sri Lanka in the High Commissioner's statements within and outside UN forums, whether it be in the UN Security Council or successive sessions of the Human Rights Council, democracy conferences, or merely comments from her on incidents or events in Sri Lanka, ranging from economic migrants to the judiciary. The High Commissioner has had, from around the end of the conflict in May 2009, a regular negative observation to make. Her frequent comments to the media, some unfortunately in close proximity to sessions of the Council, could well have the effect of influencing delegations, especially when there are resolutions contemplated. This runs counter to the detachment, objectivity and impartiality expected from the holder of such an exalted office. Sweeping generalizations using such terms as massive violations of human rights and the constant targeting of Sri Lanka based on unsubstantiated evidence founded on conjecture and supposition only supports the impression of a lack of objectivity. The report to the Council is also very much in similar vein. Very little attention is paid to the significant progress achieved in the post-conflict phase, matters that we placed before the working group in considerable detail during the UPR in particular. However, in contrast, great emphasis is placed on the perceived negatives as they pertain to the Sri Lanka's process of reconciliation. This disproportionate emphasis on the negative to the virtual exclusion of the positive gives the report a skewed and imbalanced character. Mr. President, it would be incorrect to state that we do not engage with the special procedure mechanisms. During the UPR, we placed on record our continuing engagement with these expert mandate holders, an engagement we value. We agree that the special procedures, while being independent, play an important complementary role to the work of the OSHR. Sri Lanka is, however, concerned to note several instances where special procedure mandate holders have not adhered to the code of conduct and have on occasion exceeded their respective mandates. We therefore emphasize the importance of the need for the mandate holders to adhere to the code of conduct as stipulated in executing their respective mandates. A cabinet memorandum titled Assistance and Protection of Victims of Crime and Witnesses Bill was submitted by the Ministry of Justice and was taken up for policy approval at the cabinet meeting of the Cabinet of Ministers held on the 7th of February 2013. I'm sure the High Commissioner would be pleased to note that, because every time I have met her on the sidelines of the Council, she has emphasized the need for this bill. The bill has now been presented before Cabinet and it has been now referred to the Attorney General to obtain his views so that the Cabinet of Ministers can take the decision that is needed to be presented to the National Parliament. The government will engage with stakeholders in connection with the implementation of the National Plan of Action for the promotion and protection of human rights. The annual review of the Human Rights Action Plan is underway, with further information being collected from implementing agencies. The progress achieved will be published on the dedicated National Human Rights Action Plan website. On the issue of the removal process of the former Chief Justice, due process has been followed in accordance with the Constitution of Sri Lanka. Article 107, 2 and 3 of the Constitution of Sri Lanka clearly empowers the legislature to initiate the process to remove the Chief Justice. Following a submission of a motion signed by 117 members of Parliament, a Parliament Select Committee was constituted by the Speaker, consisting of government and opposition MPs, to investigate issues connected with the allegations made against the former Chief Justice. The report of the Parliamentary Select Committee was submitted to Parliament, and the matter was deliberated upon and debated for 2 days, 1 month after submission of the report. That's a cooling off period that is provided in the standing orders of Parliament. Once a resolution to remove the former Chief Justice was passed in Parliament with a 2/3 majority, with a majority of 106 votes, 155 members voting in favor and 49 only against, the required address was made to His Excellency the President. It was only thereafter that the former Chief Justice was removed from that office. A new Chief Justice has been appointed in accordance with the Constitution. Mr. President, in the field of human rights, we have engaged with the Council since its inception in 2006, continuing the practice of active participation in the deliberations of its predecessor, the Commission. We who come before this Council to engage expect that the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity and non-selectivity, constructive international dialogue and cooperation with a view to enhancing the promotion and protection of human rights, civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights, including the right to development, upon which this body was founded, will be upheld. I reiterate, Mr. President, what I said earlier. In the post-armed conflict era, we have continued our engagement with human rights bodies, acknowledging the interest that they have in the Sri Lankan situation. We have been candid in our discourse, stating the gains we have made as well as the challenges we face. We have put in place structures for discussion and implementation of solutions. However, we are being told that our chosen path is perhaps the wrong one. It is supposedly deficient. We must be lectured to or even taught. We must be instructed by people who know little of our history, culture and socio-political background. Mr. President, from the Ashokan rock edicts of the 3rd century before the Christian era, societies in our region have been guided by values underscoring good governance and human rights. We do not need to be told. We do not need to be taught. These are not culturally relativist arguments, but are values deeply embedded in our social and cultural makeup. In the modern post-colonial phase, we have, as independent and sovereign democracies, undertaken international obligations with regard to human rights. We have democratic constitutional processes in place. We are fully aware of what we need to do domestically and internationally. We participate in discussions with treaty bodies. We participate in the UPR process. We come before this august body in a spirit of openness and candor and discuss issues. Sri Lanka has voluntarily provided information on the various facets of post-conflict development to the international community through the Universal Periodic Review and UN Human Rights Council sessions. Sri Lanka will continue to proactively and voluntarily engage with UN mechanisms, including special procedures, treaty bodies, as it did in the past. In conclusion, Mr. President, even in March 2012, when a resolution was tabled in the Council, which in effect asked us to do what we were already in the process of doing, we continued to engage in the Council. As has been our custom since the inception, we regularly briefed the Council and had discussions with regional and cross-regional groupings represented in this body on the Sri Lankan situation as it evolved. We hosted side events at which our progress was presented and discussed. We had been open and transparent about our successes and also about the challenges we faced. That resolution was, in our opinion, ill-timed, unwarranted, and violative of the ongoing founding principles of the Human Rights Council. We categorically rejected the resolution on a matter of principle. However, we pointed out the negative outcomes of the adoption of the resolution, but notwithstanding our rejection, reiterated our commitment to achieve lasting peace, stability and prosperity for our people. Effective reconciliation based on homegrown solutions is a cornerstone of that policy. We do not wish to adopt a policy of destructive disengagement, but continue with our policy of constructive and open dialogue. We expect our actions to be assessed in their totality, in a spirit of objectivity and impartiality in this Council. Our interlocutors in this body must also take into account the considerable progress made. During the UPR process, for instance, a clear majority of delegations did acknowledge and appreciate the advances we made since 2009. We thank you for that. This only encourages us to do better and is what we consider constructive. However, the focus of some other intrusive initiatives that only emphasize a few areas which need further action are less than constructive, and we consider these unhelpful. These subjective measures based on unsubstantiated assertions aimed at naming and shaming are indicative of a different agenda unrelated to the objectives of this Council. We need time and space, Mr. President, to complete our work, and we are confident that we will be able to deliver for our people and our country. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Mahinda Samarasinghe for his statement. Excellencies, ladies